Look, man, you read the title, you saw the thumbnail or whatever. Let's just get right into it. There are a lot of really striking visuals in Zach Cregger's 2025 film, Weapons. A young teacher being ushered to her car as a mob of parents swarm around her. Benedict Wong caving in his boyfriend's skull. Evil Chapel Rowan. Now is probably a good time to mention that this video has spoilers for Weapons. But the most enduring visuals, in my view at least, are the ones the film was marketed with. Children waking up in the middle of the night, running out of their homes, and their classroom the next morning, all but empty, except for one student. I think these visuals remain the most enduring from the film because they walk this very fine line between the real and the fantastical. Obviously here, there's a big element of the supernatural, of the exaggerated and unbelievable. But at the same time, these visuals do hit pretty close to home. For all their exaggerated flair, images like these are, at the end of the day, more grounded than I think we would like to admit. Because living in America, or at the very least observing the country from afar, these are images we're kind of used to. They're images that, in some capacity, we've seen before. In doing my research for this video, I ended up watching quite a few video essays, video analyses, clips from behind-the-scenes footage of Weapons on YouTube, and over again, I kept getting these ads for a charity called Sandy Hook Promise. Now, I don't personally know a lot about this specific charity, but what I do know a little bit about is the event that spawned its creation. The Sandy Hook shooting is one of those events that happened when I was a child that never left me. I think it is, for a lot of kids in my generation, our own version of 9/11 to a certain extent. In December of 2012, a gunman entered the Sandy Hook Elementary School and opened fire, ending the lives of 6 adult staff members and 20 children between the ages of 6 and 7. When this occurred, I was 8 years old. I find it ironic that I saw so many ads related to Sandy Hook as I researched for this video, because as the title of this one or the thumbnail might already suggest, Weapons is about school shootings. It is insane that I probably have to censor that for YouTube, but here we are. I think a lot of the strength in Weapons' opening imagery, the imagery that so defines this film, is in the fact that it captures one of America's darkest commonalities. That the reason it feels familiar is because it evokes the imagery, however subtly, however artfully, of school shootings. In doing so, I think the film makes a kind of promise to us as the viewer that it will create a horror movie with real social commentary and bite, a horror film focused on gun violence in this country. And that's a promise I would argue the film most definitely makes good on. However, let me not mislead you. For as striking as the opening minutes of Weapons are, as striking as that imagery is, and as striking as what it evokes is, what's really most compelling here and what the film is most primarily focused on is what comes after. See, Sandy Hook is a tragedy that I can never forget, but it is not some isolated event, like I've already mentioned. This is a pattern in our country. For as much as I remember Sandy Hook, I can also remember Uvalde and Parkland. Last year, there was a shooting at a high school literally like 45 minutes from where I went to high school. What that has spawned is not only a world where we can see patterns in these tragedies, but a world where we can see patterns in their aftermath. Patterns of blame, of anger, of hate, and confusion. Patterns that I think Weapons as a film is more interested in focusing on than even the event that sparks the movie. For as much as the opening here viscerally hits you, Weapons is very much a slow burn, and that slow burn is rooted in what comes next. That title, weapons, it's a little bit misleading. Sure, there's plenty of weapons in the film, a liquor bottle, a potato peeler, a weird gun in the sky, a couple thorny sticks, a pistol, some scissors, 2 forks, 3 needles, and a partridge in a pear tree. You get the idea. But those weapons are so much less of a focus than the title might imply. So much more focus here is placed not so much on the weapons, but on the people who wield them. How almost anything can become a weapon in the right, or in most cases, wrong hands. And that's really how we get to the title. This is a movie about how people, under duress, become weapons. And make no mistake, this is a movie about people. I think the most interesting thing about weapons, at least to me on a first viewing, is the structure of the film. How the movie divides itself into separate chapters, all rooted around individual characters. I think Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia, or if you're really nerdy, the Game of Thrones books that all divide their chapters based on character and root their chapters in the perspective of a certain character. And there is most certainly a reasoning behind that structure, it giving us special insight into major players of the story, but also inviting empathy and forcing us to examine how human beings can be weaponized by factors outside of themselves. It's kind of harder to be mad at Josh Brolin's Archer for vandalizing Justine's car when literally 2 scenes before we see him incredibly depressed, messing up at his work, sleeping in his son's bed, longing for the return of his child. Yet it's also harder to forgive Archer when before those scenes, we have to watch Justine endure the hell of his harassment. Seeing the horrible life that James, a homeless drug addict, has to go through makes us really, really hate the cop that specifically targets him in multiple scenes. But then again, right before, we have to see the nervous, emotional wreck that same cop is, in turn kind of humanizing him as well, as much as the cop can be humanized, I guess. As a consequence, I think we're really forced to interrogate how these people reach the points where they hurt others. And best believe all of our main characters at some point, in some way, shape, or form, hurt others. Additionally, these characters have narratives that intersect, influence one another, adding up to a film that really probes how much we're in control of our lives, where we end up, and how wider systems, networks of people and actions motivate what we ultimately choose to do. There's this reoccurring theme in the film of parasites, something that comes up way too often for us to just offhandedly ignore. Stories of creatures that use their host as a means to an end, occasionally even taking them over completely, Last of Us style. And I think the meaning of that symbolism becomes very clear when we keep that idea of systems controlling our actions in mind. If we as people are so heavily motivated by forces outside of ourselves, why is it that when something bad happens, we so regularly focus all of our anger toward the host and not the creature feeding off that host and telling them what to do, the wider world around them? And I have to assume that maybe around this point in the video, you're pausing, looking at your screen, typing in the comments, Ellie, are you really skirting personal responsibility for something as serious as gun violence? The answer, of course, is no, I'm not. And for what it's worth, I also don't feel as though the filmmakers are doing that either. But to understand exactly how Weapons covers its issue, what ideas it brings to the table about reform and how we combat gun violence, I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room here, the villain of the film. I feel like I just wrote a really similar line to that in my Sinners video when I went to go talk about Remick. Y'all really need to watch my Sinners video, by the way. It's literally a masterpiece. 10,000 views is, I think, criminal. Anyway, and despite the primary focus of Weapons being on larger systems out of our control, there is a central big bad of the film, the spine-chilling, shudder-inducing Aunt Gladys. Yeah, so major weapon spoilers, like I've already said. The grand twist here is that behind everything is this little old lady in a weird bowl cut wig. See, before the film started, Gladys came to live with her estranged niece as her health began to fail. Upon her arrival, she quickly revealed her witchy ways and also her need to keep others under her spell to kind of boost her own energy. First, she entrances the parents of Alex, her grandnephew, and later does the same to the entirety of Alex's elementary school class, thus the disappearing kids. With an item from someone, most often their hair and the snap of a stick or ring of a bell, Gladys can instantly take control of basically anyone. She can make them kill, hurt themselves, come running towards her, or just freeze catatonically in place. Really, whatever she wants. Gladys is a character, to say the least, a magical entity in an otherwise pretty grounded and serious world, who spends the vast majority of her time parading around in exaggerated makeup and a truly, truly hideous wig that I have already kind of referenced previously. Needless to say, she feels a little bit out of place in the film at first. So why exactly is she here? Well, I think it ties back to the allegory we're focused on. Gladys as a character, the witchy older relative who comes to live with you, who takes over your parents and feeds on kids just like you, she's very fairy tale in nature. With that in mind, we might take a new look towards certain elements of weapons. The narrated open and close of the film, the chapter structure, many of the symbols of the movie, and draw a clear connection to fairy tale stories. Specifically, the very dark, often lesson-bearing fairy tales such as Hansel and Gretel, Brothers Grimm type stuff. Those stories, now created decades ago, were artistic methods of processing real dangers. And I'd argue Weapons is doing something similar. I think someone could be reasonably bothered to hear that Weapons is a film about gun violence and then actually go see the movie only to discover it's a very exaggerated and oftentimes funny horror film. It might register that this is an exploitative film, milking real horrors for the kind of scares that sell movie tickets. But I would make the case that writer-director Zach Cregger is instead here continuing in a long tradition of fairy tale storytelling as a means of processing and unpacking the real world. And in typical fairy tale fashion, the reality of it all gets a little oversimplified. Thus why we have Gladys. In the real world, people are pushed by a congruence of surrounding factors to enact violence and pain. In Weapons, though, Chucky's 70-year-old sister just kind of tells them to do so. It's all very neat, a kind of wish fulfillment in a certain way, but I think Cregger very much understands that and explicitly plays into it to make his final point in the film. To return to our pin about personal responsibility and acts of violence, Cregger here kind of imagines a perfect-ish world where evil is the result of one woman, where the story ends with the very same kids that she hurt literally tearing her limb from limb. But the very storybook finality of that ending is directly challenged in the final moments of the film. As the movie draws to a close, Cregger robs us of catharsis. The affected kids and adults continue to be catatonic. Plenty of horrible rules of life still remain, and the seal of suburban safety now remains forever broken. Feel that hollow pit in your stomach at the end of Weapons? That's reality coming back into the picture. The reminder that issues such as these could never have a fairy tale happy ending. That once this Pandora's box of violence was opened, there was never really a way for us to shut it. Systemic reform can certainly help, but even if we bundled the entire system into one woman and dismembered her, the effects would still linger. It feels pretty fitting then that Cregger has already talked about the possibility of a Weapons sequel, because shit like this doesn't really have an end. Okay, adding this real quick while I'm editing because I just heard that the concept for Weapons Follow-Up is actually supposedly a Gladys prequel film, which I think even further compounds the very mixed messages at the ending of this movie. The suggestion here, I think, is that Gladys, our very fairy tale villain, is surprise, a multi-layered person just like everyone else in the film, and her violence is also motivated by forces outside of her, complicating further any kind of tidy bow we might have put on the ending of Weapons. I think that was always the intent here, as apparently there was also a cut Gladys chapter of the film. And while a lot of her more sympathetic moments or hints at her motivations are cut in favor of making her more ominous, I think looking back on the film, I can kind of further see how she is a sort of misunderstood, complicated villain, once we look beyond how shrouded in mystery her character is. Going back to the parasite thing we talked about earlier, I think the question becomes how much of Gladys's actions are motivated by an outside host of sorts. Again, we're left to feel like this cycle of violence, its motivations and those who perpetrate it, even when they seem very clear-cut, go well beyond simple understanding or prevention. All of that feels kind of nihilistic, don't it? Cregger seems to have crafted a film that very explicitly probes at the idea that our world and others around us directly influence our actions, specifically violent actions. And then he just kind of throws his hands up at the last second and says, well, it's more complicated than that. Who really knows? But don't confuse the kind of purposeful mess of this ending as a retraction or non-statement. There's a lot of discomfort in the finale of Weapons, but there also is a little bit of hope. The suggestion that some of the kidnapped children are slowly regaining their speech, the concept that a source of evil has been destroyed, the reassurance that all this struggle, for however imperfect its result, mattered for something. And the only reason that happens, for as corny as it might sound, is because people cared to make a difference. Because they fought against the same world that stole these kids and then turned them against one another to ensure they were too busy fighting to make any actual progress. Nothing good in this film happens without collaboration and unity. In a world where the actions of others can so completely spread misery, a kind of misery that snowballs and grows, I think there's a message to be heard that acts of empathy and kindness can move mountains just the same. That's what I choose to take away from this film. You cannot control this world or the people within it, but you can control yourself, and maybe that impacts it all the same. You know, in a lot of ways, Weapons reminds me of a recent series I saw called Adolescence. Adolescence is a show about a young boy who murders one of his female classmates after being radicalized by Andrew Tate adjacent content on the internet. It is definitely more true crime than dark fairy tale, making it a much harder watch than Weapons. But in the two projects, I see a lot of similarities. Adolescence, like Weapons, is told from various shifting perspectives. Obviously, the two projects have very similar subject matter, and I think they reach a similar kind of conclusion on their central topics. Adolescence really stews in the messy emotions and chaos of its central tragedy. A lot of attention is paid toward the wider systems that caused it in the first place, but at a certain point, you're just forced into these really uncomfortable moments of a boy who did this horrible thing and the fallout of it. Very heavy emphasis placed on how kind of impossible to process it all is. But Adolescence does find small instances of hope in people doing their best and caring for others. In a reality such as this, what more can we really do? Weapons has some really interesting ideas, ones that obviously I think are worth exploring because I dedicated a lot of this video to them. However, a lot of those ideas do wind up in this kind of murky in-between space of discomfort, as I think is kind of fitting for a topic as complicated as the one Weapons is tackling. Systems are at fault, except they don't provide the whole picture. Sometimes people do bad things, but those bad things don't happen in a vacuum. Stuff like that. But there is one thing I'd argue this film stands on completely, and it's what I will end on and leave you with today. In an environment that so often turns people into weapons, we have to find a way to disarm ourselves.
And they never came back.
And like I said, y'all, with that, I leave you today. This was a kind of more brief, less scripted analysis of weapons, just some general ideas I had walking out of a first viewing of the film. Obviously, this video is getting produced a lot faster than a lot of my other stuff, but I still think that my analysis here was definitely meaningful, and I think I did kind of tap into the core message of the film. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope that you'll check out other videos of mine on this channel. I know some of y'all are longtime fans, routinely watch all my stuff, but I do produce really quality material, and I'm trying to do more lately with a little bit less work put into editing so I can produce stuff a bit faster and kind of just get more videos out to you all in some capacity. Look, I've been talking for an hour. I'm a little bit tired. I'm not gonna belabor the point any. Weapons is great. It's a wonderful film. If you haven't already seen it, I don't know why you watched this video, but like, check it out. I'm gonna close out here just by issuing a massive thank you to my supporters. Thank y'all so much for watching my videos, supporting my work. This is my first video as a 21-year-old, so kind of surreal to be entering a new era of the channel. I think a couple years ago, I didn't even know that I would be doing it for this long, or at least be as successful with it as I am today. So I'm eternally grateful for being in the position I am with this channel right now, and for y'all for supporting me. So I'm going to close out here with a massive shout out to my patrons. It is y'all's support that keeps this channel up and running. Please go check out my Patreon if you want to support in a major way. That is the best way to add to my channel. I need the money, trust, and believe. And also, support me in every way. Subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends, comment something down below. Go and follow me on Instagram. I love to have a bigger follow account. It really boosts my ego. Also, go follow me on Letterboxd. I do really good Letterboxd reviews. So go blow my account up. I also want to give a massive shout out to my patrons in the shout out tiers. Special thanks to Roderick Hare, Blame Bootsy, Mig D, Anya May, Onyx, Sophie Villarat, Alex Mirabal, and Grace. Couple new ones in there. Really appreciate it, guys. And with that, as always, I have been Ellie. Y'all have been wonderful. And until next time, bye.